Five Nights at Freddy's. Fazbear Frights. Number 6. Blackbird. Stitchwraith story. Larson pulled his brown sedan just inside the gaping doorway of the abandoned factory. He turned off the engine and looked around. A murky twilight was beginning to slip down the mountains on the far side of the lake, threatening to swallow the remainder of the day's light. Larson figured it would be dark in about an hour. Looking in the rearview mirror, he noticed a couple security lights mounted on tall poles, standing like sentinels guarding the factory and the dock extending out into the lake beyond. Some of that light would make it in through this door, he figured, and he'd need the light if he didn't start moving. "Get on with it!" Larson commanded himself, picking up his portable radio and tucking it in his jacket pocket. He reached for the plastic garbage bag into which he'd stuffed the evidence he'd purloined from the evidence locker. It had taken some fast talking to get it past the sergeant on duty. He couldn't explain what he needed the evidence for, because he hadn't quite convinced himself that he actually needed it. His intuition said he did. His logical mind was laughing hysterically. Getting out of the sedan, holding the garbage bag, Larson looked around again. He waited and listened. Unless a situation was pressing, he always liked to take a minute to assess where he was. Take it in, feel it. It wasn't going to require a minute to assess this place. In just 5 seconds, Larson had felt enough. What he felt was so strong, it hit him like an invisible force, and he had to grab the open sedan door to steady himself. Larson wasn't sure he believed in evil, but if evil did exist, he'd have said it resided here, or at least it was visiting. He cocked his head and listened for another few seconds. He had nothing but the sound of cars passing on the street beyond the building, and a couple crows cawing from atop a corroded shed about 10 feet from the factory's outer walls. Wait, was that movement he'd seen? He turned to look at a yellowed, dirty window in the shed. No, nothing was there. Larson quietly closed the sedan's door. The space he was in looked big enough for 2 more cars like his, and beyond it, another larger room beckoned. It was dim inside the old factory, but Larson could see well enough. He could hear too, and what he heard told him where he needed to go. From the far side of the expanse that opened up ahead of him, scraping and rustling sounds warred with plinks, thuds, and clatters. Someone was in there. Larson stopped and wrapped the plastic bag's ties around his wrist. Once it was secured, he drew his gun. Extending the automatic in front of him, he kept forward. A whisper came from what felt like a few feet away, just up ahead. Larson went rigid. Someone was close enough that he could hear them whisper. Why couldn't he see them? He took a breath, steadied himself, then strode to the edge of the huge room dominated by a massive blue trash compactor. The compactor contained a pile of electronic and metal debris, and next to the compactor's chute, his quarry stood. A strange cloaked figure, Larson muttered. Yep, there it was. Larson pivoted left and right, trying to find the source of the whisper. But he was alone on a wide concrete platform that encircled the factory floor. Alone with the strange cloaked figure. The figure didn't seem to care about Larson's presence, though. It looked to be sorting trash. It was emptying a large garbage bag. Larson watched gears, hinges, and tangles of wire drop from the bag. Then he saw the bag let go of the distorted face of a fox wearing a pirate's eye patch. The disconnected arms of a fox followed, one arm ending in a hook. Foxy. Lawson recognized the animatronic from Freddy's. He was on the right track. The broken Foxy and what looked like other robotic debris slid down the compactor chute into the square belly of the steel beast. When the remains hit the sides of the compactor, the clang brought Lawson to his senses. "Stop!" he shouted at the figure. The figure turned and took a step toward Lawson. Lawson raised his gun and squared his stance. "Leave him alone," Jake said to Andrew. Jake had no sense of himself as an individual body now, but he could still act like one when he tried really hard, like now. He threw his non-existent shoulder into Andrew's equally non-existent chest, and the two of them began fighting for control over the animatronic container that held them. The animatronic lurched back and forth in what Jake was sure must have looked like a spastic dance to the detective, who was pointing his gun. "Let me take care of him!" Andrew shouted. "I can stop him!" His choppy words reflected the effort he was expending, trying to wrest control of the animatronic from Jake. Andrew had already proven he could command it at least a little, because Jake hadn't taken the step toward the cop. "But you'll hurt him," Jake reminded Andrew, shoving harder with his imaginary shoulder. Andrew grunted, then said, panting, "We have to get rid of this stuff, or it will hurt more people." Jake concentrated and raised his imaginary hand. "Yes, but not by killing someone else." Frowning and throwing every bit of his will into what he wanted to do, Jake was able to overcome Andrew. The animatronic's skeletal hand came up and slapped the compactor start button. Then Jake took a solid grip on Andrew and prepared to do what had to be done. Lawson flinched when the compactor started. The sudden bass rumble and reverberation momentarily stupefied him. Then, in the quarter second he spent to process that, he got his next shock. The figure threw itself into the chute. From where he stood on the upper platform of the big room, Lawson was able to see the endoskeleton of the figure land in the spinning, thrashing heap of metal. Immediately, the parts started to consume the figure as everything shined inside the compactor. A metal press began shoving its way into the writhing mass of junk. Lawson started to run toward the chute, but the press plowed through the junk faster than he could cover the yards between him and the switch. It moved steadily, inexorably through the twisted mound with a roaring screech that sounded like a clash between a behemoth and defenseless creatures wailing in their death throes. It looked that way too. So much of the junk in the pile were parts of robotic toys and animatronics that it was easy to humanize the pile and see it as a mass grave being defiled by the powerful metallic arm of a monster. All Lawson could do was stand and watch the compactor destroy the parts that had made up the cloaked figure and everything it had been collecting. As soon as Jake and Andrew landed in the compacting junk, the baseball field returned to Jake's consciousness. He heard his dad laugh, and he tasted a fresh peanut, and he felt himself begin to float free again. Jake resisted, focusing intensely on the junk surrounding him. He couldn't leave Andrew. The memory was so strong, though. Even as he put all his attention on the junk, his dad's face and the warm sun buoyed him. "Andrew, grab my hand!" he shouted. Andrew reached up. As soon as he did, he too began to disconnect from the endoskeleton. Jake was so relieved, so thrilled, that he let the memory embrace him again. He and Andrew both began to move away from the physical confines, as if they were being carried by a sleek, swift sailboat toward that wonderful sunny day in the baseball field, but only for a few seconds. Then Andrew was tugged downward. He was being yanked toward the infected robotic parts below. "No!" Jake shouted. He tried to hang on to Andrew, but the force resisting him was so strong. Jake looked down. Below him, a bizarre presence of color and movement was rolling with everything in the compactor, including the animatronic Jake and Andrew were in. This chaotic collection of muddy brown, dirty yellow, and shocking red pulsed with rage. "Come on, Andrew!" Jake called. "I'm trying, but I can't! Something's got me!" Andrew called back. Jake felt like he and Andrew were being stretched between two forces. From somewhere beyond this dirty factory, the good feelings of Jake's memory boosted them. From below, density roiled around Andrew, keeping them anchored. Jake thought the density was Andrew's pain. Then he realized he was wrong. It had nothing to do with Andrew. "Andrew," Jake said, "there's something else in here with us." "It's him!" Andrew cried out. He sounded terrified. Jake focused harder on his memory. He ate a hot, salted peanut, and he looked into his dad's warm, happy gaze. Larson couldn't move. He was mesmerized by the compacting junk, and by the inexplicable light rising from it. What was that? He realized he was still aiming at the crumpling, deconstructing Stitchwraith, and holstered his gun. He rubbed his eyes. Was he seeing things? It looked like a faint aurora borealis was rising up from the convulsing junk. "Yes!" Jake cried. Andrew is breaking loose. Then, out of the nearly fully compressed junk, the contorted but identifiable shape of what looked like a bent skeletal man thrust upward, with ashy, see-through skin that revealed dried up but still quivering organs. The man-thing looked like a creature from hell. Its limbs broken and bursting through the cracked skin, its face misshapen, its torso twisted. The creature took shape while Jake watched. When Jake saw the man's bones crack, fold, and reshape into what appeared to be rabbit ears, he yelled, "Andrew, come on!" Rabbit ears unfolded from the back of the creature's skull and stretched upright, and the creature heaved itself toward Andrew. Jake had hold of Andrew, and he was sure all but just the tiniest amount of Andrew's essence was in his grasp. But the creature was trying to keep hold of his friend. "No!" Jake shouted. Jake focused again on his good memory, but this time it didn't loosen Andrew anymore. It just started taking Jake away from Andrew. Jake couldn't let that happen. He wasn't going to allow Andrew to be hurt anymore. Jake had to stay and fight, blocking out anything good he'd ever felt. Jake anchored himself back into the animatronic. He faced the enemy in the compactor. As soon as Jake released his memory, the creature shifted his attention to Jake. Jake felt the creature clawed him. It felt like he was being mauled and pummeled by a force filled with a never-ending need to inflict pain. But he didn't give in to it, throwing everything he had into his effort and drawing on the power of his memory. Jake turned himself into a massive bat of intention, and he swung away, knocking Andrew loose from the evil that held him. Andrew, suddenly free, was sucked away, and he vanished. Jake, however, couldn't untangle himself from the relentless rabbit creature. He fell back into the seething junk and was engulfed in blackness. The trash compactor opened, and Larson watched it tip upward and disgorge its flattened mass of broken animatronic and robotic pieces. From above the compactor, what looked like a dying ember fizzled and fell back into the compressed junk. "What just happened?" Larson asked the room. It didn't answer. Larson shook his head and looked around. His gaze landed on a pot with 2 red flowers shaped like starfish. It sat at a tilt against the upper lip of the compactor, unaffected by the pressure that had just smashed through the rest of the bizarre debris the figure had collected. Larson thought about going down the stairs to poke around the compressed junk, but he didn't see the point. Whether he was right or wrong about what had just happened, it was done. So he turned and headed back to his sedan. There, he dropped the trash bag he'd carried inside onto the floor next to the sedan. He wasn't sure what to do with it. He'd planned on using it as a way to communicate to the Stitchwraith, but now... He leaned into his sedan and pulled out a mini tape recorder. "The, Stitchwraith appears to be dead," he said into the recorder. He felt like an idiot. Dead wasn't the right word for what he just witnessed, was it? And what exactly did he see? He took a breath and spoke into the recorder. "I saw an animatronic endoskeleton with a doll's head and some kind of battery, wearing a hooded trench coat, putting stuff in a trash compactor and pulverizing it. It also destroyed itself. I think the stuff in the compactor came from the Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center, and also from the site where the serial killer William Afton, the one notorious for wearing a rabbit costume, died." He stopped the recorder and thought for a second. "Oh, what the hell." He started recording again. "I don't believe in ghosts, but after what I just saw, I'm not so sure about anything anymore. I mean, from where I stood, I swore it looked like the Stitchwraith was an animatronic contraption, and there was some kind of supernatural light coming out of it. Like a ghost. Like the animatronic was hunted by ghosts. Maybe the ghosts were kids Afton killed, or maybe it was Afton himself." He stopped the recording and sighed. Who is going to believe any of this? Tossing the recorder in a sedan, Larson turned his back to the inner part of the factory and looked out through the exterior opening to the lake. The sky above the mountains was tinged with the faintest hint of pink. Maybe he should take Ryan hiking the next time he got to spend time with the sun. Behind the unsuspecting Larson, the compacted trash began to move, making a quiet rustling sound Larson didn't hear. The junk rose from the trash compactor and began to arrange itself into an upright being. As it began to assemble itself, the being sucked in all the remaining junk and debris from the factory. However, it also rejected some of the waste. Just as it started to form, the vaguely man-shaped structure of trash shuddered for a second, and then it ejected part of itself. A mutilated mass of robotic endoskeleton and crumpled fabric spewed through the air and landed several feet away. When the rejected detritus hit the concrete, it lay still. The rest of the trash from the compactor continued its transfiguration. It formed itself out of animatronic body parts, but not in any logical way. They were joining all haywire. Heads were being used as joints, arms as legs, and legs as arms. A torso formed from the hips and chest and belly of 3 animatronics, but each part was put in the wrong place. Hands were inserted at random all over the structure. Woven through all these misplaced pieces were wires and gears, which created a labyrinthine circulatory system connecting hinges to gears and screws and nails to eyes and noses and mouths. With each additional piece clamping into place, the miscreation stood taller and taller until it was nearly 15 feet tall. Then, looming over the detective, it leaned to the side and lifted a macabre head up to the neck made from shins. The head, like the rest of the being, was made from animatronic parts: fingers, toes, wires, hinges. Within those parts, 2 gaping black holes looked out at the world with pure malevolence. And from the top of the unnatural structure would look like 2 rabbit ears made of even more animatronic parts, unfolded and canted forward. They were aimed right at the detective. And that is the end of the Stitchwraith story. Thank you for listening to this read-through of Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Frights number 6, Blackbird, Stitchwraith story. I really hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you did, please hit that like button. And make sure you click that bell icon so you'll be notified the next time I post a new story. And I'll be back next time with the next Stitchwraith story.